And so I thought, since so many people can relate to being single, that we would start off our series talking about singleness. Okay. So for those of y'all who weren't here last week, we started a new series called Love That Pleases. Okay. Love That Pleases. We're studying the book of the Song of Solomon, which is the Song of Songs or a song of love songs. And it's all about that love that pleases you, that pleases your spouse or future spouse, because it is the love that pleases God. Okay? Now, last week we gave you 3 different stages of relationships. He gave you the courting, the wedding, and then the maturing. First you court or you date, then you wed, and then you mature in your marriage. And then within these 3 stages, we gave you 3 different themes. The seeking and finding, we're going to call anticipation. The basking in the beauty, we call infatuation. And then the enjoyment of one another, we're calling the celebration. Okay? But it occurred to me that there is one other season that comes before all of this. Before the courting, before the wedding, before the maturing of your marriage, before all of these different things that we see in relationships, there is one other season that comes even before all of these things. And that is the season of singleness. Okay? The season of singleness, where it's not complicated, it's non-existent. Okay? As a matter of fact, you would take some complication right now. It's so non-existent. Okay? We're talking about the season of singleness. If we are going to address relationships in this new series, which we are, if we're going to address relationships, and I thought it'd be best for us to address those who are waiting for one. Okay? Those who are waiting on one. So I want you to prepare your hearts here as I speak to you today, a message I've entitled, The Single Life. Okay? The Single Life, a situation of anticipation. Now, give you a couple of disclaimers before we begin. First of all, let you know we cannot yet get into the book of the Song of Solomon. We can't even get into the book yet because although the couple that is in this book, although they are not married yet, they're also not single. Okay? They are betrothed to one another, or what we would call being engaged with one another. And being betrothed or being engaged, that was just as much of a commitment as marriage was. It was just as much of a commitment to one another. If you remember the story of Mary and Joseph, when Joseph found out and discovered that Mary was pregnant, they weren't married yet, but he thought about putting her away and divorcing her, even though they hadn't been gotten married yet. Why? Because to be betrothed to one another was just as much a commitment as being married to one another. The only thing that was missing or they were waiting on was the celebration and then the consummation. That was it. So there is a commitment that's going on here in the Song of Solomon. So although they are not married yet, they are also not single. And so we got to still hold off on going into the Song of Solomon. Second disclaimer before we begin. For all those who are already married, okay, you're already married or you're already in a committed relationship. I do not want you to tune out. I don't want you to check out. I certainly don't want you to walk out. But I want you to hear me out. Don't think just because we're going to be talking about singles and singleness that this doesn't apply to you. And this doesn't benefit you. And you should have stayed home today because there's nothing here today for you. No, don't think that way, because I believe that we can better understand the relationship that we are in now by understanding what we brought to the relationship to begin with. Okay? You want to know and understand what's wrong with your relationship now and how you can make it better? Well, go back to what it should have been. And how you should have been, the mentality that you should have had. Just like in the first video that we showed you, where they said, look, if you're not fulfilled and satisfied where you are, don't think you're going to be fulfilled and satisfied where you're going. Why? Because you take the same thing with you. So if you haven't changed, don't expect your marriage to make any difference in the regard of what you're looking for or seeking after. See, I believe that one of the reasons why marriages fail, One of the reasons why marriages fail is because we are looking for them to do what they were never designed to do. And that is replace God or take the place of God. Many people are looking to their marriage to either replace God or take the place of God, and that's why your marriage is failing, because marriage was never intended for that to happen. It wasn't intended for you to seek after a mate and seek after a marriage and somehow seek that to give you what it is that you're needing. It's like the old Jerry Maguire scenario, right? The Jerry Maguire synopsis, where he goes in and he says, "You complete me." No. They cannot complete you, okay? Man cannot complete you. It is God who is supposed to be completing you, okay? And so we are out there looking for somebody to complete us, looking for somebody to do something to us that God says, no, that is reserved for me. I am your God, and I am the one that is supposed to complete you, to mature you, to grant you and give you all that you need pertaining to this life. So the reason why marriages are failing is because we're looking to man, we're looking to woman, we're looking to marriage to do what God says he is supposed to be doing. So while we're out there looking for our better half, God is saying, no, what you need to be doing is looking for somebody who's whole, okay? Don't look for a better half. Look for somebody who is whole and make sure you are getting whole yourself. And so people will look to marriage and they say, I'm lonely, I don't have anybody, and so I'm going to jump into a marriage. Well, God would have you to know marriage is not the answer to your loneliness. Marriage is not the answer to your loneliness. God is the answer to your loneliness. Why do we say that? Well, because I can think of a whole lot of people who are married, but who are just as lonely, if not more lonely, than some singles that are out there. Ask them if you don't believe them. May have some here today. Marriage is not the answer or the solution to your loneliness. Jesus Christ is the answer and the solution to your loneliness. If you are lonely now without a mate, then don't be surprised if you're still lonely even if you get a mate. Because again, you take the same thing with you, you and your relationship with the Lord. In the same way, marriage, hear me single people, marriage is not the answer to your sexual immorality. Marriage is not the answer to your sexual immorality. If I can just find somebody, if I can just settle down, if I can just get married, then I will stop sinning. Then I'll stop sinning against God. If I can just find somebody to marry, somebody wants to marry me, then I'll be okay. Wrong. Marriage is not the answer to your sexual immorality. No. Christ is the answer to your sexual immorality. Because how many of you know the desire for sexual immorality nor the opportunity for sexual immorality goes away just because you got married, okay? If you think somehow, some way, you will never have an opportunity nor a desire for sexual immorality just because you got married, you are fooling yourself. You're fooling yourself. No, even after you're married, there is still pornography, there is still co-workers, there's still people on Facebook and social media. You have ample opportunity still to commit sexual sin even after you got married. So if you're looking for marriage to somehow solve your sexual immorality problem, don't be surprised when it fails, because that's not what marriage is intended to do. Now, can marriage help that? Absolutely. And we'll talk about that later on. Marriage can certainly help your loneliness. It can certainly help your sexual immorality problem or issue that you're having, but if you haven't gotten the victory over these areas now, don't expect or think marriage to do it for you. Don't expect or think that marriage somehow is going to solve your problem. No, God says, I am your God. You shall have no other before me. I am the one that you are to look to. And so my advice to you, which is God's advice, is get the victory over these things first. Get the victory victory over your sexual immorality problem first. Get the victory over your loneliness first. Be whole, be complete, be content, be satisfied in your relationship with Jesus Christ first. Do not look to marriage or man to do what God says is only reserved for him to do. Okay? So those are the two different disclaimers I wanted to give you before we get into talking now to our singles that we have amongst us today. Now, looking at our title slide, I like this particular title slide, The Single Life, because it appears that somebody is choosing the single life. Everybody see that? It looks like somebody is choosing the single life. You see the cursor there, you're pointing, you're clicking. Somebody is choosing the single life. You see, there are some in here who are single by circumstance. You are single, but you are single by circumstance. The reason why you're single is because you're young, or you're single because you've been divorced, or you're single because you're now widowed, or you're single because you haven't found anybody, you haven't found the right person. So you are single by circumstance. But then there are those who are single by selection. They are single by selection. They are single by choice. In other words, they are choosing to be single. Then you say, wait a minute, Pastor, wait a minute. Isn't that just what single people say when they can't find anybody? I choose to be single, you know. Isn't that what people say, what single people say when they can't hold on to anybody? They're saying it's their choice. Isn't that what they say? No. I'm talking about those who are single by selection, single by choice. Now, you may be thinking, why in the world would anybody choose that? Why would anybody choose to be single? Well, it's been said that marriage is like a window screen, okay? It's been said that marriage is like a window screen, okay, with flies on it. Some are trying to get in, some are trying to get out, okay? That's what people compare marriage to. Marriage is like flies on a window screen. Some are trying to get in, and some are trying to get out. You have a lot of singles who are wishing to be married. But then married people will say, well, careful what you wish for. Because while you are wishing to be married, I'm wishing to be single again. And so when people know this and understand this, they are not hesitant, but they are more cautious about this thing called marriage. And so what you have are people who are willfully choosing to be single. And so you have successful singles. Now, we're going to be talking about two different types of singles this morning. You have successful singles, but then you have what I call sour singles. Okay? Sour singles. Now, you know what a sour single is because they look like they've been sucking on lemons all day, right? They're bitter. They're frustrated. They don't have anybody, and they're just sour in their attitude on life because they hadn't found anybody. They're still single. And so you have sour singles, and then you have successful singles. But successful singles are those who've decided to live satisfied in the state that they're in rather than frustrated over the state that they want to be in. Okay? Let me say it again. A successful single. A successful single is one who has decided to live satisfied in the state that they are in rather than living frustrated over the state they want to be in. That is a successful single. Take, for example, probably one of the well-known singles of the Bible, other than Jesus, Paul. Okay? Paul was a man called by God. He was shown great things. He was taken to the third heaven. A lot of revelation given to him. He wrote over 2/3 of the New Testament, started many churches, but Paul was single. But not only was he single, he was a successful single. Okay? Paul was a successful single, and we see it here in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 7, this is what Paul says. He says, "For I wish that all men were even as I myself." Paul says, I wish that everybody was like me. Everybody was single. But then he says this, "But each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that." Paul was a man who saw his singleness as a calling from God. Okay? He saw his singleness as a calling from God. Now, how do we know that? Well, because he calls it a gift. He calls it a gift. He says, God has given me this gift. He's given each one of us a gift, and this happens to be my gift. And the gift that he was talking about was celibacy. Okay? Celibacy, the ability to control sexual desire so you don't have to give into it, or the absence thereof. Okay? That is to be celibate. Paul says, God gave me that gift. God gave me that gift to be celibate. He gave me that gift to be single. He gave me the gift where I can control my sexual urge or desire or not even have it to begin with. And so he saw his singleness as a gift from God. As a matter of fact, Jesus would say the same thing in Matthew 12. Jesus would come and he would tell the people there in Matthew 12, there have been those who've been born eunuchs. Okay? Those who've been born eunuchs. Now, what's a eunuch? Well, a eunuch is a man who has been castrated for the service of the kingdom. Okay? A eunuch is one who's been castrated or neutered. You know, what we do to dogs. Okay? This would be a eunuch. And what a king would do is he would take a man and he would castrate him for the service of the kingdom. For example, in the book of Esther, we read a lot about Haggai the eunuch, right? Haggai the eunuch, because he was over all of the ladies, all of the women vying for the affection of the king. You see, back in those days, women did not have any rights. They did not have any power. They did not have any authority, even over other women. And so what a king would have to do is he would have to find a man to be over the women. But he did not want any fraternizing going on. He did not want any hookups happening while he was over the women. And so what they would do is they would castrate the man, make him a eunuch, to where not only could he not have any sex, but he didn't want to have sex any longer. They took that away from him. Well, Jesus comes and he tells the crowd, he says, there have been those who have been born eunuchs. There have been those who have been born eunuchs, whether it's a physical deficiency, a physiological deformity, or even a mental abnormality. Whatever it is, there have been people who have been born without this in their life. And then Jesus says this, but there have also been those who've been made eunuchs, as in the story of Haggai. But then he says there are those who actually chose to be eunuchs. There are those who chose to be celibate. There are those who chose to be single, and they chose to be this way for the purposes of the kingdom of God. Devotion without distraction. And back in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, go to verse 32. 1 Corinthians 7:32, we're going to see why Paul is going to wish that all men were like him. In 1 Corinthians 7:32, Paul says this, but I want you to be without care. Okay? Paul says the reason why I wish that all men were like me, all men were single, all men were celibate, is because I want you to be without care. How many of y'all know that marriage comes with a whole lot of care? Okay? Marriage comes with a whole lot of concern. You got to be concerned for yourself. You got to be concerned for your spouse. You got to be concerned for your kids. You got to be concerned for a job. You got to be concerned for bills. You got to be concerned for school and education and college and braces and all kinds of things, okay? When you are married, you have a lot of care and a lot of concern singles don't have to worry about. Singles don't have to give two thoughts about when they're single. And so what Paul is saying here is the reason why I wish that all men were like me is because I want you to be without care. He explains, he says, he who is unmarried, single, cares for the things of the Lord and how he may please the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of this world and how he may please his wife. The reason why Paul could be abandoned as he was to the work of the Lord, the reason why he can be completely and totally sold out to doing what God had called and purposed him to do was because he didn't have a care of a family. He didn't mind going to jail because he knew he didn't have a wife he was going to miss or a wife who was going to miss him. He didn't mind even dying for the faith because he didn't have to worry about his children growing up without a father. He didn't have that care. He didn't have that concern. He didn't have that worry. And so he can be completely and totally sold out, abandoned to do what God told him to do. Devotion without distraction. Had he been married, it'd have been different though. Had he been married, he would have had to be concerned with his wife. He would have had to be concerned with his children. He would have had to consider them and what he was going to do or not do because he has this care. And so when he says, I want you to be without care, he's talking about devotion without distraction. Same thing with the ladies. He says here in the next verse, there is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman, or the single lady, okay, the unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I say for your own profit, not that I may put a leash on you. Paul is not telling you don't get married. He's not telling you avoid marriage, there's something wrong with marriage. That's not at all what he's saying, because the Bible tells us do not forbid marriage. And that's something that the Vatican needs to know and understand as well. Okay? Do not forbid marriage. Why? Because not everybody has been given this gift. Not everybody has been given the gift of celibacy. And so when you forbid marriage, what's going on in that church is what's going to happen. You have people who they may avoid marriage, but then they abuse children because of it. That is wicked. That is evil. And so God says, do not forbid marriage. And so Paul here, he's not forbidding marriage. He's not telling you not to get married. He's not telling you there's something wrong with marriage. I'm not putting a leash on you. What he is saying is, I want you to consider what you are about to get into. I want you to consider carefully what you are wishing for, what you are hoping for. If you are single and you're wanting to get married, I want you to consider all that comes with being married. That is all that he is saying here. So he says, I'm not putting a leash on you, but for what is proper that you may serve the Lord without distraction. It is simply devotion without distraction. So there are some, again, not all. God has not called everybody to be single. God has not called everybody to be celibate. If that was the case, then we would never be able to fulfill the very first commandment, to be fruitful and to multiply and fill the earth. We wouldn't be able to do that if everybody was single and celibate. So God has not called everybody to be single. He's not called everybody to be celibate. But for those he has called to this, there are those who have made themselves spiritual eunuchs. Not that they've cut this off their flesh physically, but they've cut it off spiritually. They've decided, I am going to live as a single person that I may devote myself to the work of the Lord. And it's for the exact same reason Haggai was made a physical eunuch, for the work of the kingdom, for the sake and the work of the kingdom. So, successful singles are those who have chosen what God has chosen for them. Simply put, a successful single is anyone who has chosen what God has chosen for them. Okay? Now, I know there's some singles in here today, and you're saying, okay, Pastor, that's all great and all, but what about me? Okay? What about me? Because I wasn't born a eunuch. I wasn't made a eunuch. I didn't choose to be a eunuch. Okay? I don't have the gift of celibacy. I have wants, I have needs, I have desires. I want to be married. I want to have the American dream. I want the house and the white picket fence and the 2.3 children. I want all of that. And so what about me? I can understand those that God has called to be single and those who have chosen to be single and why they would do that so they would be without care. But that's not my story. That's not my situation. That's not my case. I am single and I don't want to be. I am single and I am wanting to be married. I'm wanting to have a family. I'm wanting to have children. I want that for me. So what about me then? Well, if God can call someone to be single for a lifetime, say like Jesus and Paul, if God can call somebody to be single for a lifetime, and that person sees it as a gift rather than a curse, then wouldn't it stand to reason that God could also call somebody to be single for a season, and you still consider that season a gift? In other words, God is not saying never. He's just saying not now. He's not saying it'll never happen. He's just saying it may not happen right now. And so a successful single is one who will not waste their season of singleness. They will see the season that God has given them as a gift to grow, to mature, to develop, to prepare themselves for what God has in store for them next. See, most singles are sour because they focus on the season they want rather than the season they're in. Okay? That is why most singles are sour. Because they focus on the season they want rather than focusing on the season they're in, and thereby wasting both of them. You're wasting both of them because you can't enjoy either one. You can't enjoy the season that you're wanting because you're not there yet. But you also can't enjoy the season that you're in because all you can focus on is the season that you want. And you are wasting the season that you're in is because while God wants you to use this season to grow and to mature and to prepare yourself for the season to come, you spend all your time, all your effort, all your energy, all your whining and grinding and complaining about being married. And so therefore, you cannot enjoy either of the seasons. You cannot enjoy the season you want, nor the season you're in, and you end up wasting your season of singleness because of it. God says here, a successful single understands and knows that their life and every aspect of their life is in the hands of God. And so while the sour single is saying, God, when are you going to send me somebody? And God, I'm tired of being alone. And God, I see all my friends, they got boyfriends and girlfriends. And God, everybody's getting married except me. And God, they all have kids and families. And what about me? You see this going on in a sour single. And they say things like, God, give me somebody. I'll take anybody. And that's why you will end up with a nobody because of that mentality right there. You don't care. I mean, just let them have a pulse. Just give me somebody. I'm tired of being alone. And you will end up with a nobody because of that. The one thing that's worse than having nobody is having a nobody. Okay? Some of us in here can raise our hand. Don't raise your hand, though. You may be sitting right next to them. Don't do that. There was only one thing worse than having nobody. And that's having a nobody. And that's the problem. We're so anxious and anticipating that next season. We're willing to jump into anything and everything just so that we won't be lonely anymore. Just so that we can be in love and not just in love with a person, but in love with love itself, because that's all we see all day, every day. See, a successful single knows that it's better to be in no relationship than to be in the wrong relationship. A successful single knows that. They understand that. I'd rather be in no relationship at all than to be in the wrong relationship. Successful singles, they are not making an idol or a god out of their dates, or a god out of dating, or a god even out of marriage. They know and understand that they are whole, they are complete, they are content, they are satisfied in their relationship with Christ. Believing that if and when God wants to send them to somebody or somebody to them, He'll do it. He'll do it in His time and in His way. But they do not sit around wasting the current season that they're in out of anticipating the season to come. They don't do that. And so that is God's advice to us here if we are single today. What it boils down to is this. If you are single, what kind of single are you? Right? What kind of single are you? And what kind of single do you want to be? Are you a sour single? Because you haven't found anybody yet. Or you can't hold on to anybody. You hadn't gotten married yet. And you want that. And so you spend all your time frustrated over the season that you want rather than the season that you're in. That you've become sour and bitter and frustrated because of it. Or are you a successful single? Are you a successful single? Do you know and understand the gift that God has given you in this season that He has given you? That you may grow and mature and be developed and prepare yourself for what God has for you next. If you are not a successful single, but you want to be, then God's advice to you today is this, that you would begin to redirect your focus. Begin to redirect your focus. Rather than focusing on the season you want, begin to focus on the season you're in. And like in the video, it may mean that you got to get off Facebook and social media. You got to get off those things that cause love to be awakened in you. Remember the Shulamite's advice to us throughout this entire series. Do not awaken love until it pleases. And so if that means you got to get off social media, get off social media. If that means you got to stop watching TV shows and movies that remind you of love and romance and all that, stop doing it. Stop awakening love if it's not time to be woken in you. Why wake up that sleeping giant that it's now hard to put back to sleep or to control, and now it takes control over you? So God simply says, redirect your focus. Rather than focusing on the season you want, begin to focus on the season that you are in, and do not awaken love until it pleases. Now, there was a coach who had a question. He's a defensive coach in football. And they asked him one time, they said, Coach, what is the best defense to get into? What's the best defense in your opinion to get into? I mean, is it the 3-4? Is it the 50? A nickel package? Is it a cover 2? What's the best defense to get into? And he said, well, the best defense in football, I believe, is a good offense. The best defense is a good offense, because the longer you can keep your offense on the field, the longer their offense isn't on the field and able to score. And so way back when you had this strategy of coaches, they would run the clock, okay? So they wouldn't matter. They'd run the ball and they'd get 3 yards here and 2 yards here and 4 yards here. And it was a very slow game. It wasn't very exciting to watch. But that's how they would run the clock so much and then score at the end, so the other team would never have an opportunity to get on the field and score against you. So he says the best defense in football actually is a good offense. And I believe in the same way, the best way to defend a good marriage, the best way to defend a good marriage is by waiting for the best marriage. Waiting for the best marriage possible. Waiting for the time when you are having God work on you so that you may be at your best. And know and understand that he is doing the exact same thing with the one he has for you. So that when he brings you together, because you waited, because you took your time, it will be the best defense to defend a very good marriage. So God's advice would be, take advantage of your season of singleness. See it as a blessing, not a curse. See it as a season that God has given you to prepare you for what he has in store for you. Not like jail or a sentence and you're just waiting for parole. See it to be developed, to grow, to mature, to be whole, to be complete in Christ yourself. And believe that God is going to do the same thing with the one he has for you. And I believe that will be the best way that you can protect and defend a good marriage. I believe that if people were to do this, you wouldn't have to spend so much time with me in my office, talking about your marriage and needing help with your marriage. I believe if everyone would do this, you would be able to have the marriage that you want, the marriage that you dream of, the marriage that is possible for you to have. Now, I understand the majority of the people in this room did not do that, including myself and my wife. We did not do what I just finished preaching to you, okay? Hence the reason for this series, why we're going to be talking about love and sex and relationships and marriage and dating and all that. Because the way that we learned of these things, we learned from the world through our flesh. If we would be honest here, this is how we learned about sex, about dating, about marriage. We learned it from the world through our flesh. God says, I want to change that. I want to change that. I want to teach you about these things, about sex, about love, about dating, about marriage, about relationships. And I want you to get it from your spirit, not according to your flesh. And so we are going to spend some time in this book. We're going to spend some time in dealing with relationships so that I will believe not only would our singles benefit from it, but even if you're already married, you too are going to benefit from this. You are going to know and understand the heart of God when it pertains to marriage and our relationships so that we would all have hope in this. Does anybody know Patty? Patty, her real name is Patrice Bryant. Okay, she's no longer Bryant, but Patty used to be a part of our ministry for many years. She was a part of our fellowship, our ministry, since the time she was a freshman in college. Okay. Since she was a freshman in college, she had been a part of this ministry. And throughout her college, she's now graduated college and all. Throughout her college days, coming to this church, we never saw her bring a boy to church. Okay? Never saw her bring a date, bring anybody she was seeing, talking to, or dating, or anything throughout all the years that we knew Patty. But one day, Bird Dog, Tim, and I, we take her and a friend out to lunch. And as we're eating lunch, Tim, he asked her, he says, so Patty, are you seeing anybody? Do you have a boyfriend or anything? What's going on in your life in that area? And Patty said, oh, I'm not worried about that right now. I'm not worried about that. No, I'm just having a good time being a Chi Alpha leader. I'm having a good time going out to these mission trips and getting into the school and on the campus and in university, getting into our community, telling people about Christ, building the kingdom up. I'm not worried about that. If God has that for me, then fine. But right now, I'm not even thinking about it. She was a successful single. She didn't spend all of her time, all of her effort, all of her attention focusing on the season to come. She took advantage of the season that she was in. Well, a few weeks later, Andrew takes the young adults out for dinner, and they come back and they say, yeah, we were talking, and come to find out, Patty now has a boyfriend. she has a boyfriend now. She's dating somebody, seeing somebody. A few months later, we found out, Patty is engaged. Patty's engaged to get married. A few months later, Patty's now married. She is no longer Patty or Patrice Bryant anymore. She has a new name and a new man in her life. Well, what happened? Was Patty trying to manipulate God? Was she trying to fake it till she made it? Was she trying to try and trick God into sending her somebody? No. She was simply saying, I'm okay where I am. I'm okay where I am. If this is where God has me to be right now, then I'm going to be here. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to get as much as I can out of it. And if God so chooses to send me to somebody or somebody to me, then I will then enjoy that season of my life. She was focused on the season that she was in. She was looking to the Lord for her peace, for her joy, for her satisfaction, for her confidence. All that she needed, she sought it from the Lord. And when God saw that it was time to give her what she needed and give to her husband what he needed, he brought them two together. And I'm not a betting man, but I could imagine that this is a marriage that will probably last because they both were doing this. They were both doing this. They were both more in love with their relationship with the Lord than they were with one another. And by God then simply bringing them together, they were now able to enjoy a new season of their life. Not because they were looking for marriage to do something that they needed, but because God now knows it was time for them to be together for what he has for them. And what he has done with Patty, he is willing to do with you as well if you are single. And so my advice to you and God's challenge to all of us, I believe, is that we would stop making idols out of things, out of people, out of circumstances and situations. We would simply look to the Lord for what we need and trust that he will give us what we need when we need it. Amen? Now I'm going to do something today. I'm going to go ahead and call the band up. We're done